Hello everyone, welcome to cloudwani.com. My name is Mahesh. Today I'm going to discuss about VPC endpoints, especially in related to the S3 VPC endpoints and why we need to configure the endpoints and what exactly the benefits of the endpoints here. And if you see my first scenario, accessing S3 bucket from public subnet EC2, which means I have a public subnet here, and this public subnet is created under one of the VPC, and I have one EC2 is running. And if I want to access the S3 bucket, which is the S3 bucket 1, which is created under Amazon network, I need to use the internet gateway. So using the internet gateway, my traffic is routing to the internet gateway, and then internet gateway is actually connecting to the S3 using the internet. So at the same time, let's say if I have my private subnet which is running, let's say my private subnet where exactly I deployed my EC2 instances, and I don't want to expose my EC2 instances to the internet, but still if I want to connect to the S3, what I need to do here? Let's say if you see this scenario, my private subnet EC2s are running here and they are not actually exposed to internet gateway, and as well as they are unable to connect to the S3 because they don't have any connectivity to the internet. In this case, what exactly we are going to do and what is the solution that we are going to implement here to access the S3 bucket successfully? We are going to deploy the S3 endpoints, which is actually VPC endpoints we are going to create here. So the VPC endpoints, if we create here, your private subnet EC2s can able to access S3 without exposing your EC2 to the internet. At the same time, it is going to use the VPC endpoint is going to use the private link which is actually running in Amazon network, and it will access to the S3 buckets. And using the VPC endpoint, you can also define what kind of access you are going to give to the services. What are the AWS services? In this case, we are going to use the S3 service. So let's say the VPC endpoint for S3 will allow private IP address to access Amazon S3 with no exposure to the public internet. So you don't need to expose your private subnet or private or whatever the services deployed under private subnet. You don't need to expose them to the internet, but still you can access the S3 buckets. And by default, VPC endpoint will allow access by any user or service within the VPC. And using the route tables, you can enable access control for AWS resources to access S3 via endpoints. And also S3 bucket and endpoint should be within the same regions. You cannot create endpoint in some region where the S3 bucket is created in a different region. And also there is a limit to create endpoint gateways per VPC. By default, it will allow you to create 20, and you can still adjust the count to 255 maximum, which is actually the maximum. And now we are going to see the lab how we are going to create the endpoints for a private subnet. In this case, we are going to create a VPC, our own VPC, and in the same VPC I'm going to create public and private subnets. And public subnet I'm going to give this subnet, and private subnet and I'm going to give this one, and which is 10.0./24. And also I'm going to create one internet gateway which is going to connect to my public subnet to expose to the internet. And also I'm going to create few routing tables for private and public, and then we are going to create S3 bucket and then S3 bucket policy for IAM, which is going to attach to the EC2. And finally we are going to create a EC2 endpoint so that we can able to access the S3 bucket which we created from the private subnet, same way how we are going to access the S3 from the private subnet here. Let's proceed to the lab. Okay, I just logged into my account, which is Mahesh, and I'm in a Singapore region, and I don't have any resources running. And let's go to the slide what you need to create here. So we are going to create one VPC. Let's go to the VPC, which is virtual private cloud, and click on the VPC. And if you see here, there is one VPC which is already created by default. So I'm not going to touch this VPC at the same time, and I'm going to create a new VPC. So I'm going to create a VPC for now, and what is the name I'm going to give? my vanilla VPC. And what is the CIDR block I'm going to give here? I'm going to manually input my CIDR block, which is actually I prepared for here. Last 16. So I have released another video about what are the subnets and how we are going to calculate the CIDR values. Maybe that's again a different topic which we are not discussing now, but still I just created 10.0.0./16 as a CIDR for my VPC, and I'm going to give a name. It's already taken the name, so no IP6 because it don't support, because your endpoint does not support the IPv6. Okay, now I created my VPC. If you see my VPC, which is actually running here, now I'm going to create the subnets. So let's go to the subnets, create a subnet, select the VPC, the one which we just created, and I'm going to create private subnet. Availability zone I will leave it, no preference, I don't need it for now. Sorry. Public subnet is private subnet 10.0/24/24, and name is private subnet. Let's create a subnet and create one more subnet in the same VPC which we just created. Now public subnet, the CIDR public subnet is 10.0.10/24, name public subnet. Now I created both subnets. Now I'm going to create a gateway, internet gateway. If you see here, there is one gateway which is already just by default it was created. Now I'm going to create an internet gateway which is new one. I created my internet gateway. Let's click on the gateway, and it is showing as detached. We need to attach to the VPC, which is the one we just created, and attach the internet gateway. So now the internet gateway is attached. Now let's create the routing tables here. Let's go to the routing tables. Route tables. Private route. Select your VPC. Create route table, and then this is private route, so it is just a local and not attaching to any internet. And then subnet associations, so we need to attach the private subnet which we just created. Now let's create another routing table which is going to be public route. Select the VPC and public route. So now I'm going to attach my public subnet which we created earlier. So it is now associated with our public subnet. Okay, let's go to the route tables again, and I have my public route here. Let's click on the public route. If you see, it's only attached to my subnet. I'm going to create a new route, which is the destination is internet, and the target is internet gateway. Internet gateway, which is just IGW lab which we created. Save changes. Okay, routes. Yeah, now it's active. Now, so what we have done so far, we created a VPC and we created public and private subnets separately using whatever I have given here, and then I created a internet gateway, and then I created a routing table for public and private. For public one, I already attached the internet gateway routing table also, and also now we are going to create a S3 bucket. S3 bucket name warning, and then I'll just leave everything default. Create bucket. I'm not going to enable any server-side encryption, everything. So now I just created an S3 bucket. Okay, in order to access S3 bucket, either we should have some EC2 instance created. So let's go ahead and create quickly two instances. One is from private and one is from public instance, launch instance. And I'm going to launch Windows instances. Select retry 1 and T2 micro. Okay, here network, I'm going to select my VPC, and the subnet, now I'm going to public subnet. When I'm using the public subnet, I need to enable the auto assign public IP. So let's go to the storage and then tags, next security configuration, previous tag name value public EC2. Security groups, so this is actually already allowing from RDP port from the internet, so that's okay. Let's create a new pair. One in lab. Download keeper and launch instance. So now the instance is now creating under public. So I'm going to create another instance, another Windows. T2, next configuration details, select your VPC, the one we created the VPC. Now I'm going to select private subnet. Private subnet, I don't need to attach the public IP. Even though you attach it, it's not going to work because the internet gateway is not attached. So next, storage, no need names, name private EC2. Configuration, yes. So now it is actually allowing from the internet to RDP, which is not required. So the custom one, you need to allow the RDP port 3389 from the public subnet, so which is 1.0.24. Choose an existing keeper, acknowledge, change, select the keeper name, launch instance. I just added a security group to allow RDP port from public subnet to private subnet. This is because I want to access my private subnet EC2 instance from the public subnet EC2, or else I don't have any other connectivity to access the EC2 and test the S3. So that's the reason I allowed the security groups from public subnet to private subnet, or just the RDP internet. In this case, it is not even going to expose to the internet, it is just allowing the port between the public subnet and the private subnet. So let's go back to the lab and see if the instances are getting created. I just connected to my public subnet server. From here I'm going to connect my private subnet server, which is actually this is the IP 10.0.0.1.15. Connect. I need the password. Let's go and get the password for this. To get the password, go to your private instance and connect BP client, get password and browse the key that you have downloaded. To get, just copy. Okay, now we are connecting to my private subnet server. Yeah, I just connected to the private subnet server. If you see, I'm in the two servers now. So one is public subnet server. From there I connected to my private subnet. So let's open the public subnet server. I open the command prompt and I'm trying to connect my AWS S3. Let's list whether it's able to list or not. See, it's unable to locate the credentials files, which means the IAM role is not created. So far we never created the IAM role, which is actually, as per our lab exercise, we need to create the IAM role. So let's go ahead and create the IAM role. Roles, create role. This is for my AWS service. EC2. Next, policy. I'm going to select S3 full access. Next, so this is just the policy definition, and IAM for S3. The role is just created. Now let's go to the EC2. Go to your instance and attach the IAM role. EC3 IAM underscore EC3. Just save it and do the same thing. Save it. Now let's go back to the VM and try the AWS S3 LS. See, it is going to list down all the S3 buckets. Let's go to the private subnet VM now. I open the console here, the one we just logged in. Let me go to the command prompt. AWS S3 LS. See, if I am trying to access the S3 from my private subnet, it says the URL is not accessible because it is unable to connect, because it is in a private subnet and there is no way to connect to the AWS S3. So let's go back to the console and create an endpoint now. So now we need to create a VPC endpoint to access the S3 bucket from our private subnet. Let's see how we are going to create S3 endpoint, a VPC endpoint. So I have two VPCs. Let's go to the endpoints here. And you don't have any endpoints running. Just create one endpoint. This is for S3 endpoint underscore private. So this is for my AWS services. So it is not for any private link or any other marketplace services. So here I'm going to search for S3. So Here I'm going to search the S3 gateway. The interface is actually different. That's also an endpoint, and that we had already discussed. That we are going to discuss in another video. So for now, today we are going to discuss only gateway endpoints, and then I'm going to add my VPC. So now I need to associate to the routing table. Which routing table I need to associate for this? So this is for my private route, so that it will allow this particular route to access this particular endpoint. And now I am going to give the custom or the full access. So let's select the full access. Name is 3 endpoint private, and then create endpoint. Now the endpoint is created and it is already attached to the private route. So let's go back to the VM and try now. See, it is accessible now. You're able to see all the S3 buckets from private subnet as well as the public subnet server. Let's just recap on what we have done so far. So we created the VPC, and we created a public subnet and private subnet, and then we created an internet gateway, and then we created a routing tables for public and for private subnet. At the same time, we allowed the security groups to access private subnet EC2 from public subnet EC2. And also we created a S3 bucket and S3 bucket IAM policy to allow the EC2 to access the buckets. And then we created a VPC endpoint, and then we attached the VPC endpoint to the private routing table that we had created in the earlier. Finally, we are able to access S3 bucket from the private subnet without exposing your private subnet EC2 to internet, and it is going to access S3 using VPC endpoint and the private link. Thank you so much for watching my video, and please help to subscribe my channel by clicking the subscribe button below. Thank you so much. Bye bye.